afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, the diplomats that are in the room. We thank you for coming to our presentation on the state of the economy. Our friends from civil society, members of the 40 states, we thank you for waiting for us patiently as we battled with technology. This is a review of the economy of Zimbabwe as of the end of October 2020. But in addition to being a review, we also offer a 10-point plan on the way forward. The theme of this address is restoring and returning Zimbabwe back to prosperity. Restoring and returning Zimbabwe back to prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, it is common cause that our country is arrested by a multitude of crises. There is a massive dislocation and disequilibrium in the economy. There is a broken down of the social services and social delivery. If you look at public health delivery system, you find a serious abuse of the hospital staff, whether it's nurses, whether it's doctors. You see the absence of drugs. You see an exponential depreciation of the social indices, the maternal mortality rates, the infant mortality rates, to figures that are worse off than 2008. We locate these crises, the mother of this crisis is being the crisis of legitimacy that is arresting our country. A crisis that emanates from the military coup of November 2017 at the beginning of the year, with the high fights that we came up with. Those high fights are part of the agenda and narrative of the MDC alliance of restoring and returning the country back to prosperity. As you already know, our key 5 issues are: number 1, the issue of legitimacy and establishment of the people's government. Number 2, the issue of protecting the right to human dignity and the economic affairs of our citizens. Number 3 is the fight against corruption and the protection of the country's resources. Number 4 is the fight for the protection of the citizens, particularly the encroachment of civic and political rights. And what we've just seen a few minutes ago proves exactly our point, that the citizen has to be protected, organizations have to be protected. And lastly, the issue of protecting the Constitution and the civil liberties. So, in formulating our economic alternative and presentation, we make the point, by the way, we will distribute the entire document after I finish my presentation, and we'll post this on our website. We make the point fundamentally that the precondition of moving Zimbabwe forward is, of course, the resolution of the political crisis, resolution of the crisis of legitimacy. And this involves 5 key issues. Number 1, there must be diplomatic pressure and advocacy. Number 2, there must be dialogue under certain circumstances. Number 3, there must be structural reforms in this country. Number 4, there must be an implementation phase, an implementation mechanism, what we call the National Transitional Authority. Once those reforms have been implemented, the country must be free to go to free and fair elections. So reload is an inextricable part of my presentation this afternoon. So on economics, the first issue I want to touch upon is the humanitarian crisis. We contend, ladies and gentlemen, that the humanitarian crisis is a crisis of leadership. is a crisis of governance. And that what we have experienced in the humanitarian crisis is in fact a manifestation of the lack of performance legitimacy. In other words, the reflection of the cluelessness, of the lack of capacity of this regime. The statistics are frightening. 8.6 million people have to receive food aid in 2020, which is 60% of the population. What is also frightening is the number of children that are affected, the number of children that have to be fed. Can you move this slide? The number of children that have to be fed, which are around 3.6 million people. There is something that scientists refer to as the severe acute malnutrition, or OSEM. This grew in 2018 by 0.2%, in 2018 by 1.4%, and in 2020 by 3.6%. The one figure that is really frightening is that our food production in 2020 will fall by 57%, from a figure of 2.44 metric tons of maize to about 1 million metric tons of maize. But what is interesting is that the entirety of the sub-Saharan region has actually increased output by 8%. So in the region, there's been a growth of food production by 8%, but for Zimbabwe, there's been a reduction in food production by 57%. So clearly, there are man-made factors, which is why we contend that the humanitarian crisis that we face in Zimbabwe is essentially man-made. The same applies to COVID-19. The response of the Zimbabwean government was a disaster. At the time that the virus and the pandemic hit Zimbabwe, we only had one care center, an ill-prepared Wilkins hospital, which actually at the time did not have proper medical equipment in the form of ventilators. And all of us remember the tragic narrative of young Zororo Makamba. By the end of April, less than 9,000 COVID tests have been carried out in Zimbabwe. And if you compare in percentage terms, we are the country across the globe, including Malawi, including Mozambique, including Swaziland, that have carried out in per capita terms the least number of tests on the globe, on the entirety of the globe. In November of 2020, Zimstat produced a price and income survey, PISIS, which made certain important findings. This is government, this is Zimstat. And I'll just read to you 3 important findings from the PISIS report to illustrate how deep and structural COVID has caused in our country. So I'm quoting from the PISIS report. Less than half of the children who were in school before the COVID-19 pandemic engaged in distance learning following school closure. In rural areas, only 1/4 of the children engaged in distance learning. This is frightening. 75% of our children have actually missed the entirety of the academic year due to COVID. And only a small section of kids in urban areas, and I will submit that in the more posher urban areas, not in Highfield, not in Tvaresekwa, but possibly in places such as HIS, such as Highlands, such as St. George's, such as Heritage, if they manage to have their children engage in distance learning or IT learning. Number 2, there was also a considerable fall in household income since the onset of COVID-19, as 90% of households that operated on a non-farm business reported a drop in revenue. So 90% of households in Zimbabwe have been affected. But listen to this one, the third finding. Employment dropped as 1/5 of the working people before the COVID-19 lockdown restrictions lost their job. This affected both urban and rural areas, and job losses were particularly severe in retail and other services sector. Zimbabwe's unemployment figure is 95%. meaning that of that 5% that is informal employment, a fifth, 25% of the working population lost their job due to the COVID pandemic. I want to come to the real sectors of the economy. And so what I'm submitting so far is that the combination of the political situation, the combination of the humanitarian situation, the combination of COVID-19 makes an urgent case for the restoration and the return of Zimbabwe back to prosperity. And you'll see when I begin to outline our 10-point plan, the urgency of the situation. The Zimbabwean economy is an unprecedented tailspin, suffering from massive headwinds across all sectors of the economy. In 2019, the economy will shrink by a staggering 12.5%. And what it essentially means is that we are back to depression economies. So if you look at the graph that we have presented before, you will see that practically for all intents and purposes, from 2016 onwards, the economy has been recording sub-zero growth rates. With the 2020, we project 2020 to be around -12%. 2021, contrary to the estimations of Minister Mutuli Mube in his budget strategy paper, we estimate a below zero growth rate. And the factors are primarily man-made. The factors are primarily as a result of incompetence and cluelessness. Now that graph is very important. I heard that graph, the return to depression economies, because the Zimbabwean economy is very cyclical. The Zimbabwean economy loves these booms and slumps, booms and slumps, booms and slumps, which you see there, you see the curves. But Zimbabwe's slumps tend to be U-shaped. So if you look at this slump, it tends to be, you see the shape of a cup, it tends to be U-shaped. What it means in economics is that if you are trapped in a U-shape, it means you fall down steeply, but it takes you a long time to get out. Now, if I were to impose the graph of the Zimbabwean economics, since 1965 or since 1980, you will see these huge gaps in economics. They are called Kuznets depressions. This is a situation where your economy has a tendency of going into these depressions that last for 11 to 15 years. So if you remember the crisis last time, the crisis last time lasted from 1998 to 2011, an 11-year period where the economy lost 60% of its value. So that's a Kuznets depression that lasted for 11 years. We put the brakes during the 4.5 years of the government of national unity, but we are back again. We are back again into that camp. So we are back to depression economics. We are back to recession economics. And recession economics is characterized by three things which are arresting our country at the present moment. Number one is low productivity or low output. And that figure speaks for itself with growth rates that are averaging -5% per annum. Number two, a typical crisis of depression economics is weak or low aggregate demand. So if you go into the shops right now, unlike 2008, the shops are full of goods, but people are picking 2-3 goods and running away to their cars or to their homes. So there's weak or zero aggregate demand. That's why goods on the shops are not moved. The third characteristics of depression economics is, of course, excess capacity. Excess capacity in the form of unemployment. 95% of the people in Zimbabwe are unemployed. Excess capacity in the form of idle industrial capacity. The capacity utilization of the country is around 20%. If you go to the industrial sites, you see factories that have got grass. If you go to Bulawayo industrial sites, you see factories that are being converted into churches. This, ladies and gentlemen, is depression economics. We have dovetailed and fast-tracked ourselves into a depression, but a depression that is fast-tracking itself into an economic recession. The IMF in April 2020 produced a staff report of 2020, which was an indictment. The IMF is normally placid, is very normally complicit. It normally plays around and sugars and butters and puts mascara, puts makeup on dictators. It is desperate to look for success stories. But this is what the IMF said in their staff report of 3 April 2020. Zimbabwe is experiencing an economic and humanitarian crisis. High fiscal deficits financed by RBZ money creation resulted in severe macroeconomic imbalances and market distortions. The governments that came into office following the 2018 elections adopted an agenda focused on macro stabilization. This was supported by a staff monitor program adopted in May 2019, but is now off track as policy implementation has been mixed. Progress on fiscal reforms was overshadowed by costly missteps. That's how so the disaster of Mtuli Nube, they euphemistically referred to them as policy missteps on monetary and forex market reforms. Climate shocks have crippled agriculture and electricity generation and magnified the social impacts of the fiscal entrenchment and current reform, leaving more than half the population food insecure. Protracted external arrears constrain access to external official support, while additional commercial borrowing is worsening the debt overhang and likely complicated discussion on debt resolution. With another poor harvest expected, this is in 2020. Growth in 2020 is projected to near zero following a sharp contraction in 2019, with food shortages continuing. With no progress on clearing long-standing external arrears, the authorities face a difficult balance of pursuing tight monetary policy to reduce very high inflation and fiscal policies to address the macroeconomic imbalances and build confidence in the currency while averting the crisis. This report of April 2020 effectively put a death knell to the staff monitoring program. For all intents and purposes, the IMF, the World Bank, and all the IFIs, together with the development partners, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, the European Union, China, India, all the countries have effectively written Zimbabwe off. And they've written Zimbabwe off because of what they euphemistically dub policy mistake, which in our respectful submission is a crisis of governance, is a crisis of leadership. It's a reflection of the broken down social contract. So one of the things, and we mentioned this in our 10-point plan, one of the things that the government has to do, one of the things that the authorities have to do as part of restoring and returning Zimbabwe back to prosperity is to begin re-engagement with our FIs in a bid to ensure that we clear our arrears with the World Bank, about $2 billion, with the African Development Bank, about $560 million, with the Paris Club of Lenders, about $5.4 billion. I've left out the debt that we owe to the African Import-Export Bank. I've left out the debt that we owe to the Chinese. Let me move very quickly to inflation. As I'm talking to you right now, Zimbabwean inflation stands at around 759%, which is the second highest in the world after Venezuela. But inflation is a byproduct of two things. Number one is the maintenance by the regime of overambitious money creation activities by the central bank. When you read our main paper, we devote a section to money creation activities by the central bank. Between June of 2019 and June of 2020, there is a broad money supply in Zimbabwe, M3 as economists call it, has grown by a factor of almost 600%. What this means is that the Reserve Bank has been creating money through printing of physical money, the notes, but most importantly through the abuse of the RTGS system and also the monetization of treasury bills. When you read our documents, we refer to an incident that happened in July of 2019. As you know, SI 33 of 2019 was introduced in February of 2019. So all treasury bills suddenly were converted into local currency, into the RTGS dollar. But there was one treasury bill of US $360 million, which the authorities had issued to Kudata Gray Sekunda in January of 2019. So Kudasa Kunda, or Kudata Gray being who he is, he forced the government to buy off that treasury bill in July of 2019 at Paro market rates. So the treasury bill was 360 million. If you convert it to the exchange rate at the time of 1:10, it means the market suddenly found itself flooded with 3.6 billion Zimbabwean dollars, which were then flooded in 4th Street and caused the exchange rate to collapse immediately. The rate moved, some of you will recall, from 1:7 to immediately 1:25. This is an illustration of what we mean by adventurous money creation activities by the central bank. But from the example I've given you, you will see that there are in fact 3 drivers of broad money supply and are Fortarai drivers of inflation. Number 1 is of course the RBZ activities. Number 2 is corruption, because the only reason why Sekunda received preferential treatment was because of corruption. The third thing, of course, is an over-ambitious fiscal policy. This government has ignored the fundamental rule of economics. You can only spend that which you have, what I used to call, we eat what we kill. If you spend what you don't have, you create a deficit. And when you create a deficit, you have to monetize that deficit. You have to find ways and means of filling the hole. Oftentimes, that's where the problem comes, because extra legal means of monetizing the budget deficit come, like printing of money, treasury bills, and so forth. That is why, if you look at this graph now, you see literally non-existent inflation, because we don't have this Zimbabwean dollar. We don't have the Zimbabwean dollar, we only have the US dollar. So just like in the GNU, you literally see zero inflation. But you start now with the post-2018 election period. What does the government do? First, on the 1st of October 2018, they introduce the 5% intermediate transaction tax. So that causes prices to spike. But most importantly, in January of 2019, they introduced SI 33 of 2019, they reintroduced the Zimbabwean dollar, and suddenly you see a spike in inflation. So our point is clear and simple. Zimbabwe's economic problems are many-made. There is a result of the failure of Mnangagwa-nomics. There is a result of the failure of the policies, the economic policies of destruction and predation implemented by this government since 2018. And that graph, that sharp graph, illustrates that. I want to show you a comparative. Can you go to the graph on the comparative? So this is inflation in the region. So look at Zimbabwe. That's Zimbabwe, 786. That's for the whole of Africa. So that's Zimbabwe, 786. The country that follows a distant number 2. So there's, if there's no number 2, there's no number 3, there's number 5, 868%. That's Sudan. That's Congo. But look at our neighbors. Zambia 15%, Malawi 7.6%, South Africa 3.1%. So Zimbabwe is a black swan. The extent of, you see, when you have a high inflation like 14%, that's bad governance. But when you have high inflation like 785%, you don't have a government. You have failure. You have predatory economics, and that graph illustrates our point. Can I move to de-dollarization and the impact of SI 33 of 2019? As I said, I'm now cutting, but with a lengthy document that I hope you read because it has a lot of data. So in February of 2019, 2019, the government introduced SI 33 of 2019. And SI 33 of 2019 gave the effect of de-dollarizing the economy. We submitted at the time, as we submit now, that the conditions for the introduction of our own currency did not exist. Number one, we did not have sufficient reserves to sustain a currency. Those of you who have read the National Development Strategy, you will see the ambition of this government to actually build a 6-month buffer zone of reserves. At the present moment, we don't have reserves. The only reserves that we had were the $300 million of SDR, special drawing rights, that were left by the government of national unity that were sitting in Washington, DC. The first impact of de-dollarization was on wages. So can you move to the graph on wages? The average civil servant was earning $500. After SI 33 of 2019, there was an 85% devaluation of a civil servant's salary. The wage bill, the government wage bill, was about 90% of total cost. Right now, the government wage bill is now 37% of total cost. And this graph again shows what I'm talking about. So you see, 2013, the government wage bill is 61%, 2014, 60%, 2016, 78%, 2017, and here taking their official figures. The true figures are actually 90%. But with 2019, with the introduction of SI 33, you see a dramatic fall from 80% to 26%. So what effectively they did was that they reduced the effective salary of civil servants by a factor of 85%. They are happy because they're now claiming that we're balancing books, we've got a fiscal balance. But what they've in fact done is to rob the worker by reducing effectively his wage bill. So the wage bill is reduced from 90% to 26.5%. Right now, as I'm talking to you, it's 37%. And that's a disaster. Because whilst the salary of the civil servant has been reduced, his cost infrastructure has remained the same. So you are now earning effectively $20, but your rent remains the same. Your school fees remains the same. Your grocery remains the same. Meaning that for the average worker now, after February of 2019, you are effectively in deficit. So when you go to work, by the end of the month, when you sit with your wife going over your salary, you actually find that you are in a net deficit position. Which is why right now, teachers are not going to work because there is no point in going to earn a salary when you actually end up in a net deficit position. Nurses are not going to work because effectively they are now earning a minus salary. So the biggest impact, can you move to the next graph on bank deposits? So effectively, therefore, the government has devalued wages, but they've also devalued your savings in the economy. Savings were around $6 billion, as you can see here. So that's like that's $6 billion as of January 2016. At the time, you could actually go to an ATM and put your card and you actually get foreign currency. But because of the impact of SI 33, the informal de-dollarization, this entire stock of value has been devalued to a level of $1.2 billion. So from $6 billion to $1.2 billion. So now there are no US dollars in the market. It's not because of externalization, as they would try to argue. It's not because of money laundering, as they would try to argue. It's simple economics. They've converted illegally and unconstitutionally people's balances by a wrong and wasteful monetary policy. and mismanagement of the exchange control regime. That is to say, the premature introduction of the Zimbabwean dollar when the correct conditions did not exist. So one of the things that is so essential in restoring and returning Zimbabwe to prosperity is to sort this mess, is to sort the mess of monetary policy insanity. The next thing that has suffered are pensions. Now, the pension situation is very unfortunate. As you know, up until 2009, thanks to hyperinflation, $5.89 billion worth of pensions were destroyed. This, as all of you know, was confirmed in the Justice George Smith's Commission of Inquiry into the pension and insurance sector. The factors that caused that loss of value are well known. The factors that caused the loss of value are well known and they've been described in that report. First was the government's mismanagement of the economy and in particular hyperinflation. The report attributes that 43%. Second was a weak regulatory framework. The Insurance Pension Commission did not do its job. The report attributes that 21%. Third was the predatory habits of the banking sector itself, of the insurance sector itself. They were paying themselves fancy salaries and so forth. The report attributes that to 36%. So that's the first crisis, the 2008 crisis. The insurance sector lost $5.8 billion. But as all of you know, from 2009, the insurance sector then slowly, and pension sector then slowly built itself up as people were making contributions in US dollars. So by 2018, the assets and values of the pension and insurance sector were around $4 billion. However, thanks to SI 33 of 2019, thanks to February of 2020, that entire value was lost. So the current value of pensions in Zimbabwe is a mere US $1.2 billion. Of that US $1.2 billion, a mere US 200 million actually consists in terms of liquid cash. The rest are buildings. So when you see the huge old mutual offices all over, know that that's where your pension. But if you go to the bank, their bank account, they have nothing. The entire sector is got US $200 million. What does this mean to you and me? It means that for the second time in less than 10 years, we have suffered yet another catalytic loss of pension and insurance value, which is a disaster. It is a disaster because all countries depend on savings. Pensions represent forced savings. Companies go and borrow from money that is kept in savings. If you go to South Africa, the reason why the Cotsattus of this world are so powerful, the trade unions, is because they control huge pension funds and the economy can move. A developing country needs at least 25% savings, which are at least 25% of GDP. China is developed to be the second biggest economy in the world because it had savings of 50% of GDP. Now we've got minus saving, and you can't expect that the country will grow. And you will see when I come to the 10-point plan, our proposals on that. So the impact of de-dollarization has been critical. Critical. I now want to, and I'm going to combine certain things here. I want to come to the Dutch auction system. There has been a claim by this regime that the Dutch auction system has worked and has stabilized prices. We contend that the Dutch auction system is not an auction system. An auction system is a free market with free entry on both supply sides and on demand side. So the most common and the freest market that we know in Zimbabwe is the tobacco auction floor. There are over 100,000 tobacco producers in Zimbabwe. They all go to the markets to supply tobacco. So there is liberalization and openness on the supply side, i.e. the players who supply the product. In my example, tobacco farmers. Regrettably, as far as the Dutch auction system is concerned, there is only one supplier, the Reserve Bank. Only the Reserve Bank has been supplying foreign currency. So where you have got one supplier, you can't call that an auction. It's a fixed exchange regime, because he who controls the supply line, he who controls the tap, can control the value of the product. And you will see that the price of the product, the price of foreign currency on the Dutch auction system has remained constantly at 80. It has been floating between 79 to 82, and it has averaged 80. But now, go back again, go back to the previous one. Now, this is South Africa. This is the rand. The rand, South Africa is a US $400 billion economy. This is a strong economy. The rand, compared to Zimbabwe, is fairly strong. It has been anchored at around 1:15 to the US. But even at that, it has been very volatile. Look at that. Look at that, because it's not rigged. It's an open market system. Can I have the next slide? Now, this is the rand from the period June to November. I've used that period because the auction system in Zimbabwe started in June. Now, look at the volatility of South Africa. Now, look at Zimbabwe. This is June. It's a flat line. There's no volatility. And the reason why there's no volatility is because it's a controlled exchange rate. It's a rigged exchange rate. The governor wakes up on the wrong side of the bed on Tuesday and says today is going to be 81, or today is going to be 79. There is no science, there is no attempt to be sophisticated. Just look at how flat this graph is and compare with South Africa and the economy. So the issue of exchange rate stability is a myth. And I want to give you other statistics. On average, $18 million has been released to the auction floor every Tuesday. Which means that I'm just trying to make my page. Which means that by the end of the year, around $468 million would have been released. Assuming the same will happen in 2021, in a 12-month cycle, the auction would have sold around 936 million US dollars. But you and I know that the country's exports, the country's imports, that is what we buy from outside the country, is around 7 billion US dollars a year, which is broken down as follows. Around US $2 billion goes to fuel. We consume external fuel, your diesel, your electricity. Around $1 billion goes to the importation of electricity, this electricity. We're only producing around 600 megawatts, so we have to pay ESCOM or Cabora Plaza HPC around $1 billion US dollars. Another $1 billion goes to drugs, the drugs that are in our hospitals. And next year, the amount will increase as Zimbabwe, like everyone else, struggles to buy the COVID-19 vaccines. That big pharmacy is competing to produce Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Oxford, and so forth. So next year, we are going to have 40 new vaccines, and Zimbabwe has to buy vaccines. So the cost of drugs will also go up by the importation of drugs, and the drugs bill will also go up by. So then, of course, you've got food, which has to be imported. If you go to Pick n Pay, 85% of the product you are going to buy in Pick n Pay Boroto right now has been imported. We're a huge supermarket of South Africa, we're a huge supermarket of China. So what it effectively means is that someone has to finance the US $7 billion worth of imports. But it's not the government, where the government's figure is $80 million per week, which comes to $936 million per year. That means someone has to, there's somewhere where that $6 billion is being funded from outside the formal economy. And this includes diaspora remittances your relatives are sending you money, now they're sending you food. It also means that there is a lot of illicit external trade, what we call in our document, grey imports. If all of you go to 4th Street right now, you will see buses and buses from South Africa carrying all kinds of goods, refrigerators, food, and so forth. That is a grey import. So effectively what I'm saying is that the auction floor is rigged, but it's meaningless vis-a-vis the market and the market's requirements, which is why Espalethini remains strong, which is why 4th Street remains strong. But we make the point that this myth will break, there will be an implosion, as more and more demand on foreign currency increases. And we know in 2021 it will increase. It will increase because of demand on drugs money, fuel money, electricity again is shrunk. So when it increases, when the demand of foreign exchange increases with a limited supply, the price will shoot up. So the pretense of 81, 79 is a myth, and a myth that will be shattered very soon. I want to move to another myth. Which is the myth of surpluses and balancing books. Our Minister of Finance loves talking about budget surpluses. The graph you are seeing here, we extracted it from his budget strategy paper of 2021. So this is supposed to be zero. So his hope is that he will maintain, balanced budget. But this is him. This is not us. You will see. This is for 2020. That even he himself estimates that, and you see this from our lengthy paper, estimates that the budget deficit for this year will be at least minus 1.4% of GDP. So he doesn't lie. In the papers at least. But the real issue, ladies and gentlemen, is as follows. You cannot claim a budget surplus when hospitals have no medicine, when there are no teachers in schools. You cannot claim a budget surplus when the public health system is collapsed, the public education system is collapsed. You cannot claim a budget surplus when you fail to fund COVID. COVID was supposed to be funded to the tune of $18 billion. You all remember the COVID strategy paper that was launched by Mr. Mnangagwa in March, April of 2020, and $18 billion, it has not been funded. Some of us demanded the payment of social safety nets to workers during COVID. We suggested that the government should pay at least US $50 per family. That has not been done. So you can't, it's unwise, wrong, fictitious, and the like to claim a budget deficit or a budget surplus when you are underfunding the budget. As you know, the budget will be presented shortly. When we interviewed in Parliament all 9 ministries, they testified that for the 2020 budget, the 2020 budget had only been funded by 30%. So 70% was unfunded. So you can't claim a budget surplus when you are holding on to money and you are not funding the same. So once again, the myth of a budget surplus is what it is. It is a lie, it is a fib. And part of the problem with the current authorities, in particular the current Minister of Finance, is that lies come naturally and easily to him. And that is regrettable for a policymaker. Tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth. I don't believe him. He starts lies even before he opens his mouth. And that's a rare quality, if I may say so. I want to come to another myth now. The myth that they've met their TSP targets. You've heard them going to town about TSP targets. Now these are the targets that they've missed, and I'll illustrate this. Number one, they've missed targets on fiscal deficits, they've missed targets on domestic savings, they've missed targets on the reduction of the civil service. So what we simply did was we took the TSP and then broke it down on their promises. These are the things that they've not made: fiscal deficit targets, domestic savings target, reduction of the civil service. They promised that they will cut down the wage bill because there are so many ghost workers. But you know what they've done. instead of actually attending to structural reform of eliminating ghost workers on the wage bill, which is real reform, they've gone through the mendacious back door of wage repression through SI 33 of 2019. And that's not a reform. When I was at high school at Goromons, would send you for detention if you played those tricks on us. Ease of doing business, devolution and decentralization. The Constitution says there has to be devolution. 7 years later, there is no law dealing with devolution. They said, go to the TSP that will eliminate funding and financing of command agriculture. There's financing command agriculture to the tune of billions. Right now, there's another creature, another Chikwambo called Mvudza, which they are financing to the tune of billions and billions. Industrialization of productivity, banking sector capitalization, they failed. And do you know what they are now doing on banking sector capitalization? When a bank capitalizes, because the bank deals with money, it has to have cash. So bank capitalization has to have cash. And the bank capitalization last time around was $100 million. So because they failed to achieve that, they've said a company, a bank can substitute any asset for the purposes of capitalization. So you've got banks like Metropolitan Bank, which have taken land and said, here is part of our balance sheet. It doesn't happen. It can't happen. Please go to the next page. Now, these are TSP targets. This is the Minister of Finance, the esteemed Professor Mtuli. So what you see in blue were his targets. So he said for 2018, his target was 6.3% growth rate. For 2019, his target was a 9% growth rate. For 2020, his target was 9.7% growth rate. That's him, that's not us. We just put the information there. What did you do in 2018? 3.5 is against 6.3. But here you can give him a pass mark, you can give him 5 out of 10. Let's come to 2019. Target 9%. Actual minus 18.3. The difference between 9% and minus 18% is almost 50%. Then 2020 target 9.7 minus 12%. So this is his growth rate. Let's go to inflation. Next slide, please. So he said in the TSP, he said inflation will be 4% in 2018, 5% in 2019, 2020, in 2020, 5%. Now we in the MDC Alliance have always argued, Comrade Lachua, that you can rig the elections, but you can't rig the economy. The economy says nada, comrades. There, 2018, 42%, 2019, 5.2%, 2020, 759%. That, ladies and gentlemen, we are having this discussion on the 24th of November, 2020. A day after Mr. Mnangagwa was sworn in as president, on the 23rd of November. Go back to that slide. Go back to the previous one. So if you want a summary of how this regime is confirmed, you just go to this government. You just go to this graph. You just go to this graph, minus 12% against a target of 9.7. This is cluelessness. This is lack of performance legitimacy. Many governments in the world, many governments in Africa, lack democracy. There's no democracy in some parts of Central Africa, but there's output legitimacy. There's performance legitimacy. So if you go to Rwanda, the economy is fantastic. If you go to Egypt, the economy is fantastic, but there's a democratic deficit. The scourge of Zimbabwe is that it suffers from a twin deficit of democracy and performance output. So Mnangagwa is a unique failure. He lacks democratic credentials and he lacks output credentials. That's the extent of the Zimbabwean crisis. A lack of delivery and a lack of legitimacy. And it's a disaster. You know, you have to behave. That's the extent of the crisis in Zimbabwe. I now want to move, ladies and gentlemen, to our solutions. So if you read the document, we propose solutions on what I call transitional issues. So transitional issues include COVID. So we spend a lot of time on COVID. The other thing that I've also cut away because of time. I've cut away the issue of corruption. I can speak for the whole day on corruption. So I'm now going to talk to our 10-point plan. The theme being restoring and returning Zimbabwe to prosperity. We love this country so much. We are patriots. We would like to see Zimbabwe being a functional democratic state where everyone lives in peace and in harmony. And you talk to your neighbor, you love your neighbor, where Zimbabwe is anchored by prosperity. We see that in Section 8 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. The first thing on our 10-point plan, Comrade spokesperson, is the resolution of the political crisis. Without resolution of the political crisis of illegitimacy, of contested election, this country can't move forward. So you can do whatever you want, you can play around with your GDP deflators. You can play around with your GDP regressions in economic modeling. Unless and until you resolve the political crisis in Zimbabwe, this economy will not move. Remember, an economy is 40% economic technicalities. It is 60% confidence and trust. And you can't have trust and confidence unless you restore legitimacy. So we contend, number one, that we have to resolve the political crisis. This includes demilitarization of the state, liquidating the securocratic state. This includes a political dialogue under the correct circumstances, a mutually agreed facilitator, creation of basic conditions that are suitable to dialogue, cessation of political persecutions. As I'm talking to you right now, 3/4 of our entire leadership is MDC Alliance is in prison or facing remand. Our spokesperson here, Fadzai Mahere, our organizer Chibaya, our vice president, everyone is under scrutiny. But not just us, the rest of civic society, Mucheiwa, young Mucheiwa, young Gadziwore, everyone is under attack. We have to resolve the political question first as a precondition. That's number one. Number two, macroeconomic stability. Now we are into real economics. Macroeconomic stability, starting with fiscal consolidation. Starting with fiscal consolidation, we eat what we kill. We have to balance the books. In economics, ladies and gentlemen, 1 minus 2, it can't. If 1 minus 2 is equal to minus 40, you've got a problem. You have to live within our means. We have to eliminate budget, deficit financing. In the National Development Strategy, the government says we need to keep the deficit at 3% of GDP. We in the MDC Alliance propose that there must be a law that says the government lives within its means, and the constitution must be amended to ensure that there is no deficit financing. A government must live within its means. Number two, again, as part of fiscal consolidation, so this is number two. As part of fiscal consolidation, we propose the retrenchment of unnecessary expenditure. The purchase of expensive vehicles. If you go to Semlev's village and you see a nice vehicle, you must know that it belongs to a permanent secretary, it belongs to what? Thanks to COVID, at least they've not been traveling. Otherwise, their travel bill would have been around US $200 million, $300 million. So the government must retrench unnecessary expenditure and live within its means. Number two, as part of macroeconomic stabilization, is the restoration of real wages. we propose as MDC Alliance that teachers, nurses and doctors and the rest of the public services must be paid in US dollars. There must be restoration of real wages in the country. C, we propose that there must be compensation for those that lost their pensions, both in 2009 and in 2019. In other words, the recommendations of the Justice Smith Commission of Inquiry must be implemented. And we propose that there must be an Act of Parliament. There must be an Act of Parliament that deals with the compensation for the two phases of loss that the country suffered. The loss of 2008 and the loss of 2019. Proposed currency reform, ladies and gentlemen. It's part of macroeconomic stability. So our proposal is that SI 142 of 2019 must be repealed. Let's go back to the regime of multiple currencies, including in that basket the Zimbabwean dollar. But where we differ now with our colleagues in ZANU-PF is that there must be no Dutch auction system. The exchange rate must be liberalized. When it's liberalized, it will find stability. In my own estimation, it will probably be around 1:80, sorry, 1:180. Let it settle. Number 3, we propose that the export surrender requirement, which has been fueling the Reserve Bank's quasi-fiscal activities, must be scrapped. In the mid short term, as MDC Alliance, we propose to randify the economy and join the Rand Monetary Union. We propose to join the Rand Monetary Union. And our proposal is anchored on the fact that the US dollar is an overpriced currency. In the last 2 years alone, it is appreciated by over 19%. It makes our exports very uncompetitive. It makes our exports very uncompetitive. So we have to devalue, Zimbabwe has to devalue not to our own currency, but to a currency that is fairly stable, but that is international standing. And that currency is the Rand. But of course, to join the Rand, Zimbabwe has to do certain things. It has to attempt to reform. There must be convergence of fiscal figures and monetary figures. In other words, Zimbabwe should not export its illness, its economic illness to the Rand Monetary Union region. So that's why we say in the middle short term, because you are going to require 2 years, 3 years to deal with the disease of the Zimbabwean economy before you achieve macroeconomic convergence figures that will allow the rest of that region to accept you. And the Rand Monetary Union, as you know, is the oldest union in the world, established in 1908. It's older than ECOWAS, it's older than the European Union, it's older than many unions. And also it fits into our agenda of regional integration. The way to go is regional integration. Remove all borders, remove passport controls, let there be free movement of goods and services. So joining the Rand Monetary Union facilitates that. So that's why that's our proposals in the long term. Reform of the RBZ. We believe that the RBZ has been a rogue bank. Right now, as I'm talking to you, they've borrowed without approval of Parliament US $5 billion. They've borrowed huge amounts of money, about $1.5 billion, to finance the Dutch auction system. So the money you see being sold at the auction system every Tuesday is actually coming from the African Import-Export Bank, but yet they've not gone to Parliament. So the Reserve Bank has to be reformed, and reformed fundamentally so that it remains to a narrow core business. A narrow core business, which is just number 1, management of the exchange rate, 2, management of monetary policy, number 3, management of the national payment system, the RTGS. The issue, the MDC Alliance will win from the Reserve Bank, the issue of regulation of the banking sector. We don't believe that you can be a registrar of banks, you register banks, then you regulate them. So as we propose in our SmArt document, we intend to establish a giant fiscal authority that will look and oversee the activities of the banking sector and the activities of all listed securities, all companies on the stock exchange. We propose to establish this oversight board. So that's number 2, macroeconomic stability on our 10-point plan. Number 3 is the land question. Some of you will wonder why the land question is economics. The land question is economics because we've got dead value in land. Land is dead capital. It has no use value, it has no exchange value in Zimbabwe. So the MDC Alliance proposes that every beneficiary of the land reform program must be given a title deed which you would then be able to use in a bank to borrow. Because funding agriculture can be done by the government. The government doesn't have that capacity. So we believe that farmers should be given title deeds which they should be able to securitize. The issue of compensation is defined in the Constitution. We don't believe in the global compensation agreement of $3.5 billion US. We believe that it was done outside the Constitution, done outside an act of parliament that determined the modus operandi of the evaluation of the compensation. So we propose a people-driven process that is anchored in an act of law. People should be consulted on compensation. And many will ask, why are we compensating white land owners when we have not compensated the victims of Gukurahundi? Why are we compensating white land owners when we have not compensated the victims of Operation Murambachina in 2005? Why are we compensating white farmers to the tune of 3.5 billion when we are not compensating black workers who are not working on the farm? So we propose a people-driven issue on compensation to rest the land question once and for all. That is what we propose. And resolving the land question is so key because a country can't survive without a land market. A country can't survive without a land market. There's no land market in Zimbabwe. Yet we're an agriculture-driven economy. So if Zamp says the land is the economy, but it can't be the economy if it doesn't have use value and exchange value. That's why we propose to give people title deeds and restore the land market so that any child who wants to buy a farm can buy a farm. And if you go on farms right now, 60% of farms are now being leased to white people because our brothers and sisters on land are not farmers. They just took these things by motor roads, but you watch Korea. I'm not saying all of them. There are few decent farmers, and I know a few of them. Ray Kaukonde, for instance, excellent farmer in Mashonaland East. There are few scattered across the provinces, but very few and too few. So to ensure that there are other entrants, let's restore the land market. So it's something that we are very clear as MDC Alliance. The next, I think it's number 4, I'm not sure, is the debt question. The debt question, ladies and gentlemen, is a developmental issue. It is a developmental issue. Zimbabwe owes external debt of around $12 billion. But because we owe $12 billion, we cannot access the huge amounts of money that are sitting at the World Bank, that are sitting at the African Development Bank, that are sitting in international banking circles, in private markets, because our risk profile is too high. So we need to resolve the debt question as a way and means of accessing the huge amount of money that are sitting at the World Bank, that are sitting at the African Development Bank, that are sitting, of course, at the IMF, that are sitting with the Paris Club of lenders, the different lenders, like the European Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, the China Exim Bank, and so forth. So resolution of the debt question is critical. And we propose a program we call SADS. Those of you who have read our SMART document, we call that debt redemption program SADS. The next issue, which I think is number 5, is gross capital formation. The country's infrastructure needs to be developed. The country's infrastructure needs to be developed. We've got a network of 100,000 kilometers, but less than 7% of it is tarred. Our roads need to be tarred because transport and the roads are an artery of civilization. Rural electrification, power. We are producing around 600 to 500 megawatts of energy when installed capacity is 2,000 megawatts. When our real demand should be around 4,000 megawatts. So we need to build Patoka. We need to embark on an ambitious program of putting solar in people's homes. There should be a law, as we propose in our SMART document, there should be a law compelling every household in Zimbabwe to have at least a solar geyser. Light and sunshine is a commodity that we have in plenty supply. We don't have water in Zimbabwe, but we've got sunshine and we've got a constant weather. So the issue of gross capital formation is so key. We have to modernize our country. I always say that if you wake up someone who died in 1968 in Harare, you won't get lost. You don't see a crane, you don't see concrete in Zimbabwe. The only thing that that person will be confused is where there was Samora Machel, so where there was Jameson Avenue, there's now Samora Machel. Where there was Moffat Street, there's now Takawira. Where there was Baker Avenue, there's now Nelson Mandela. That's the only thing we've not developed. A country cannot develop without gross capital formation. The next thing of our plan, I think, is is jobs, modernization, and industrialization. On this one, I want to emphasize that the accumulation model that Zimbabwe is using is false. We are still using the accumulation model of extraction. So if you take our minerals, and we are a mineral-driven economy, every mineral that is mined in Zimbabwe is extracted in its raw form and imported outside the country. Whether it's black granite in Mutoko, whether it's our diamonds in Ocha, whether it's gold across the country, whether it's platinum, whether it's chrome, it's exported in its raw form. So if you were to work Sisulu Road roads right now, you won't get lost because the accumulated model is still extractive the way you left it. If you take our agriculture, our biggest cash crop is tobacco. 90% of the tobacco that is harvested in this country is exported to China, to the United States of America, to England through BAT, through Rothmans of Pall Mall. That is a disaster, ladies and gentlemen. Why can't we validate that tobacco so that we sell cigarettes to Zimbabwe, instead of road tobacco? So we propose to alter the accumulation model from one based on extraction to one based on industrialization and value addition. And Zimbabwe is endowed with natural resources. If you go to Mad North, there's wood there, hardwood. If you go to Manicaland, there's softwood. There is tourism, fantastic tourism assets. If you go to Mad South, there's cattle there. There's irrigation, there. If you go to Marsh East, to Mutoko, there are fantastic vegetables. Why can't we start a pastry factory at Mutoko Growth Point? So instead of buying ketchup, we buy ketchup from the Nyamsiwas in Mutoko. So we are preaching value addition and the alteration of the accumulation model as a way of creating jobs, as a way of modernizing our country. The other thing that is also critical, we have to attract foreign direct investment. But we can't attract foreign direct investment if we are beating up people on the streets of Harare. We can't attract foreign direct investments if property rights and people's pensions are insecure. We can't attract foreign direct investment if there is a foreign currency exchange regime that changes every 6 months. We can't attract foreign direct investment where there is a 4-tier, 5-tier pricing system. There's a price of goods in cash US dollars. There's a price of goods in RTGS dollars. There's a price of goods in EcoCash. There's a price of goods in Zipit. What kind of country is that? A banana republic. A dog's breakfast, and I submit one which not many dogs would want to touch anyway. So that's under modernization in industrial. You will see these things in our paper. The next thing, which I think is number 7, I think I'm now here, so I'm almost through, is the development and urbanization of rural areas. We call it DURA. It's a sad indictment, ladies and gentlemen, that 40 years after independence, 70% of our people still live in the rural areas, in huts, grass-fed huts. It is an indictment, ladies and gentlemen, that only 30% of our people have access to electricity. It is an indictment, ladies and gentlemen, that 46% of the population of Zimbabwe still use the bush as an ablution. And in some of the provinces like Mashonaland Central and Matabele and North, as high as 79% of the population use the bush as a toilet. So the development and urbanization of rural areas is key. We need to build roads in rural areas, tarred roads. We need to build and electrify the rural areas. We need to put markets there so that people in rural areas don't have to come to Harare, to Bambazonge to sell their products. Why should someone in Karoi drive all the way to Harare to sell his tobacco? Why should someone in Togo drive all the way to Mbaremsika to sell his tomatoes? It is not all, ladies and gentlemen. So the development and urbanization of rural areas is a key developmental thrust of the MDC Alliance. The next thing Connected to that, number 8, I'm now on number 8, I don't see it there, is of course the social service delivery. Here, very quick, the issue of restoration of dignity of our people through the right to education, Section 76 of the Constitution, the right to a clean environment, the right to water, Section 77 of the Constitution, the right to health, Section 75 of the Constitution. So the social agenda is about dignity, restoring dignity to our people by ensuring that they've got a right to food, a right to agriculture, a right to health, a right to a clean environment, a right to water, and a right to education. We place education at the center of everything. Without education, there's no country. And this is why in our documents we argue that the Abuja Declaration, which demands 15% of the budget should go to education, should be respected. Then number 9, the industrial revolution and digitization. Zimbabwe must be a tech-driven economy through the use of block technology in finance and banking, in identity management, in asset registration, in crypto assets, in revenue collection. It is a crime, ladies and gentlemen, that we still have to queue for birth certificates and passports. Very soon we'll be attending to voter registration. Why do we have to do that? When you are born, you are supposed to be given a social security number. That social security number becomes your ID, your voter number. That social security becomes your identity at school. And these things don't cost a lot of money. Modernization doesn't cost a lot of money. So we are very much for the 4th generation. Lastly, re-engagement with the international community. We push as MDC Alliance that one of the preconditions of the restoration and returning of Zimbabwe back to prosperity is international re-engagement. But you can't engage with international partners when you are not prepared to play by the games of the international community. So you can't go to the international community when you are busy beating up your people, when you are busy abducting Joanna Mamombe, Netsai Maroa, Cecilia Chimbiri, arresting Fatsai Mahire, arresting Tsitsi Dangaremba. It doesn't work and it won't work. So international engagement begins at home. It starts with the restoration of the social contract. You cannot love a foreigner, a Chinese or an American when you don't love the next door person. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's our 10-point plan. It's predicated on dialogue. Advocate Nelson Chamisa, Mr. Mnangagwa, there must be genuine dialogue in this country. I thank you very much.